So we are at the future of data compliance, navigating privacy, governance, and regulatory concerns. I'm Michael Rasmussen, the GRC Pundit and Analyst. My job is research. I research what are the challenges companies face in the context of governance, risk management, and compliance, and how do you go about solving those challenges with strategy, process, and technology. I research what are your challenges and how do you solve those problems. And so I do that around the world. I compete with Gartner and Forrester. I've spent 7 years at Forrester as their top analyst, as well as Verdantix and Charters. Those are competitors too. But I'm a boutique, so the analyst firm that covers the technology in the market out there. And in this panel, I've got two wonderful panelists with me. I have Christine and Lisa. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Hello. Hi. Hello. Hello. It's okay. So I'm Christine Drabble. I work for Transwap Group, and I'm the head of compliance, money laundering reporting officer, and data protection officer. I'm excited to be here to share some of my experience, expertise, and anything that I have with pass to you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Walker. I'm Head of Compliance for the UK and Middle East at ING London branch. I also wear a couple of other hats, so Whistleblowing Protection Officer as well as Data Protection Officer. I've been at ING for 4 years and have prior to that, some time ago, also worked at the conduct regulator in the UK.
So there we have it. Oh, am I on? Still? Testing. Hello? Is it working? Okay. Well, anyways, we're here, and we're going to cover the future of data compliance, navigating privacy, governance, and regulatory concerns. You know, the modern business is what I call navigating chaos, because things are so interconnected. In fact, I'd like to use a quote from the physicist Frijaf Capra, who stated, "The more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are interconnected and interdependent." Now, the physicist at that time of the quote was talking about biological ecosystems, but you might as well be talking about the digital ecosystems and data ecosystems of the modern business environment today. So with that, let's start unpacking this complex topic. Our first question is, how are financial institutions currently coping with the privacy challenges of data compliance? Lisa, would you like to lead with that?
Sure. Thank you very much. So it's worth probably breaking down the question into the types of challenges that we're dealing with and then how we're coping with those as a bank. So I think the first one to focus on is data security. And in terms of how we manage that, data governance policies are quite critical to how we go about ensuring that data is managed and held in a secure way. Tied to that is the need for employees to understand and have awareness around data. And so some of that involves understanding what type of data they hold, what type of data they might be processing, and any obligations that relate to both that as well as any retention. So critical to making that work is ensuring that staff are well trained and their training is kept up to date. We also have challenges around data silos, and we've heard other people talk about this today as well. In financial institutions, a lot of us hold very sensitive data in some cases, and there's a need to track that data and make sure that we know where it's held in the different systems or silos if you prefer, and make sure that it's only used in the way that it ought to be used. And then finally, the other, if you like, tenet of this is data quality and data integrity. And this means that we need to ensure that data is available across different applications and systems and across the business, thinking about things like emails, SharePoints, and other data repositories, and making sure that the data that we hold is accurate wherever it might be held and consistent. There's a need in this situation to ensure that data is validated, processed correctly, maintained and protected in the right ways, and that employees, as I mentioned, understand what their obligations are in this process.
Okay, so I think when we come to look at the privacy challenges, we have to sort of go back and consider the legal basis of why you're obtaining the data. We always have to consider the data subject, who is the owner of the data. So it's very paramount for all of us to be able to think of our own processes that we have in place for each particular job that you want to do, and understand the type of data that you're going to obtain from the data subject. Once you get the data, then it has to be defined to understand that purpose as to why you have to process it. Are you obtaining it whereby you have to obtain consent? Do you have to consider that you're obtaining the data because it's a contract? Are you going to store the data because you have the powers to store the data and perform it under any legitimate interest that you have? So it's key for any of the employers probably to be able to obtain training, as they've mentioned, but also to remember that it's your responsibility to make sure that you coordinate with your data protection officer and ensure that your processing of data is aligned with the requirements of the legal bases that you need. The other key challenges that I think I've experienced is seeing that companies are not able to understand if they are controllers or processors. So I think prior to signing any agreement or contract between two parties, it's very important for us to just define the types of data that we're going to obtain and share to achieve the objective of what that contract is. I think once we have that, then it's very important for us to have transparency to the data subject. That is why it is important for every company to have a privacy policy that is on their website, for example, that lets the data subject be aware of the types of data that they are collecting, where they are collecting it, how long they are retaining it, who they are sharing it with, but also remembering who your supervisory authority is. Because without the data subject, who is the owner of the data, then actually we can't have the data that we need in this case.
There we have the first perspectives on that first question of how are financial institutions currently coping with the privacy challenges of data compliance. Thank you for that. So let's move on to the second question. And I accidentally turned off my remarkable, pressed the wrong thing there. So, just a second as it wakes up here.
We don't want to lose the data.
So our second question is, how is the increased demand and availability of data through artificial intelligence and machine learning adoption impacting strategies in protection and compliance? Lisa, I've got you to lead that one again.
Thanks very much. I think one of the things to observe is that actually our strategy around how we handle and manage data really doesn't change fundamentally, but really what's important is to acknowledge or anticipate that we're holding significantly larger volumes of data, and that the data types that we're holding or will hold may change over time, so that we may have types of data previously not conceived of, like machine-generated data, and people may not understand that type of data falls within our data strategy. So those are kind of the key challenges we see when we look towards the future. And then with that, obviously, where you've got more data, there's a potential for deeper silos, is making sure that people understand, again, their obligations. And we've talked about, at its core, what those sort of key data protection principles are. And the other is to understand data security and making sure that we've got the right security around how data is used within the organization, as much as the way that the organization is able to keep that information safe.
Christine?
So I think I find it very interesting from, obviously, Lisa is from the banking world, where they have large volumes of data. In comparison to when we come to look at fintechs, I mean, we can stretch from a larger fintech that has sort of evolved and grown as we go. We have those that are just starting off with very little data. But I think what is trending is when we come to look at AI and machine learning, and everyone is talking about data, that we need to have a certain standard of data. The key here is the quality of demand for high quality data that everyone is asking for. So if you don't have really good data as your driving force, then it's sort of going to have issues, but we have to step back. As we look at in the fintech world, we also have laws and regulations that we have to abide by. And with these laws and regulations, then we come to look at the accountability of that data. So when I talk about accountability, I'm sort of looking at the whole process, the journey of the data. I'm starting from when you've obtained the data, how you're handling it, how you're processing it, and how you're storing it. So coming to break it down, and I have to consider this, then I'm looking at the strategy that I have to have a good data governance in place. So when I talk about that, I'm sort of referring to your own internal management that you've sort of worked with your IT or your CISO or CTO to sort of define those policies, those processes, in understanding the types of data that you're going to have and how you're going to manage it. Without having to define that, then I don't think you're going to be able to achieve your own operational efficiency that will allow you to be able to obtain the high quality data that you would need for that. So it's important for us to sort of focus on the data governance and achieve that so that we have the leadership that is going to guide us to have the decision making. You're going to have the leadership also determining the cost controls that are going to help you to set up that data governance, which is your strategy towards that. But you're also going to review the regulations that you have in place, starting with either it's privacy when you're looking at data protection, or if I'm sitting on this side, I'm looking at the systems and controls that I have to report on to the regulator in terms of it. But still, don't forget, at the end of the day, you still have to define the type of data that you're going to be handling and dealing with, and where that data is going to come from. So I think I've sort of covered the sort of issues that we would have when we come to look at that.
I think I was just going to add to that. One of the things that Christine, you'd mentioned was around efficiency gains and how data can contribute to that. And I think that's a really good point when I've said the strategy doesn't change much. But actually, when we're thinking about how an organization can become more efficient, one of the things that is demanded is data on hand. So real-time compliance. Can you demonstrate to me what is the state of compliance now? What data points are you using? Can I drill down and understand those data points in a different way? So all of that has implications for things like data privacy as well. Who should be able to see what level of data and in what sort of period of time as well. So it's certainly something as a processor of data, as a holder of data myself, that we're challenged with when we're thinking about how we support our business.
And so let's move on to question number 3. How should firms mitigate third-party risks to data compliance? And so sort of piggybacking on that previous question there, Christine, what are your thoughts, particularly coming from the fintech side?
I think we have so many vendors outside who are trying to sell us software that will help us with our businesses. The key here is to strategically think about your own due diligence that you have to perform on the vendors. You need to really look at the risk assessments and create a proper questionnaire that is tailored to that particular vendor. It can't be one template that will be applied to all. You have to think about the background checks that you need to do, understand the flows, ask questions around where the data comes from, where did they obtain the data that has helped them to probably create the product that they're trying to sell to you. Ask them to refer you to at least one of the customers they have, whether it was within development of the product or one that has actually signed with them, or one that is just having a proof of concept. Because I think once you interact with them, you're able to understand the risks that yourself you're supposed to be facing. So when we come to look at this, I think I'll break it down that risk assessment, you have a compliance risk assessment that is expected to you for regulatory purposes. Then you have a compliance risk assessment that is expected for you to carry out when you're actually dealing with privacy. And then you have your own security risk assessments that you have to do in terms of understanding, your threats, and how you're going to mitigate those. But I think if you put all those into one and create your own central database for each particular vendor, it's going to allow you to tier them and grade them whether they're high risk, medium risk, or low risk. And that will enable you to work out how you're going to create your own mitigations and ongoing monitoring for them. Yeah.
Excellent. Lisa, what are your thoughts?
Well, Christine has absolutely hit the nail on the head in terms of the areas to focus on, and we would agree with that from a banking perspective as well. The key sort of objective of managing those vendor relationships is firstly to understand how we prevent data loss in the first place, and then the second is to understand what mechanisms we've got in place with any third-party vendor to swiftly respond to any data breaches if they occur. So I would echo the need to do that due diligence up front before we take on third-party vendors, and as was suggested by Christine, having other testimonials is certainly a good help towards doing that vetting process, as well as the different risk assessments and the different levels of risk assessments we do around the vendors. So I'd absolutely endorse that as well. I think in terms of some experience we've had around third-party data loss and some of the challenges in managing that process directly, what I would also say is it's really important to have those escalation mechanisms in place so that if something does go wrong, everyone understands what their roles are, what their responsibilities are, and that there are clear and open lines of communication to manage any breaches where they occur.
I just forgot one thing. So I think it's very important for you to remember to have a backup plan. Because at the end of the day, accountability still sits with you if you're a regulated entity. Your vendor is just somebody who is just helping you to fulfill the role that you're supposed to do. Always have a backup plan and always do testing. It's important to have the testing done. In the event that this actually happens, you have a backup plan to put in place and mitigate that.
Excellent. So we're going to move on to our next question. What do data governance tools need to do when implementing data democratization strategies? And I'm going to lead here. First off, I have a whole research paper on what I call data GRC. So we talk about data governance. I refer to it as data GRC, data governance, risk management, and compliance. Now, the official definition of GRC found in the OSEG GRC capability model is that GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance function. Address uncertainty, that's risk management. ISO 31000 states that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, and act with integrity, that's compliance. So GRC, broadly by definition, is a capability to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and act with integrity. Now, data GRC, in that context, is to the capability to reliably achieve the objectives that we even have the data there for in the first place, address the uncertainty and risk to that data, and of course act with integrity, the compliance, and around not just regulatory compliance, but our own ethics and values around that data as well. That's what I call data GRC. Now, data democratization refers to the process of making digital information accessible to the average non-technical user without requiring specialized skills in data handling. The goal here is to empower more people within an organization to access and utilize data in decision-making, thereby enhancing transparency, efficiency, and bringing about informed decision-making across all levels of the organization. This really enables the organization to help break down silos in data access and promote a more collaborative and data-informed work environment. Some of the things we need to be concerned about, first off, is the enhanced accessibility while ensuring security. Data governance tools must balance the need for broader access to data within an organization with strict security measures to protect sensitive information. Technology needs to offer role-based access controls, ensuring that users can access only the data necessary for their specific role and function in the organization. Next, we need to be able to maintain compliance with regulatory requirements. We need technology to be able to enable and help the organization comply with various data protection regulations, like EU GDPR. This requires built-in compliance features such as automated data handling, rules, auditing capabilities, that system of record, and reporting functions. Then we need to be able to facilitate data quality and integrity. We need data governance tools that ensure the accuracy and consistency of data access across the organization. These types of tools can automate the processes of data validation, cleansing, and deduplication to maintain high-quality data. Next, we should explore the area where we need to promote a culture of data literacy. Technology should include educational features to help employees understand data privacy standards and the importance of compliance, the critical nature of compliance. There is a crucial role of governance in training and empowering non-technical users to use data responsibly. From there, we need to be able to, just a second, implement transparent data lineage. So, data lineage tools provide clear visibility into the origin, movement, characteristics, and quality of data. Transparency in data processes helps in auditing and tracking compliance, as well as in understanding the data lifecycle within the organization. Another thing to consider is the ability to support the scalability and evolution of data needs. Organizations need to need scalable solutions that can adapt to growing amounts of data and very evolving regulatory requirements around the world. This requires flexibility of governance tools in integrating raw data and new data sources and expanding their capabilities as organizational data strategies grow. And then we need to be able to automate data governance tasks. A core feature here is to be able to automate the data governance, such as reducing manual errors, saving time, and ensuring consistent application of governance policies around data. We need tools that leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning to enhance the automation of data categorization, compliance monitoring, and anomaly detection. And finally, we need to encourage ethical data usage. Organizations need to consider the ethical aspects of data democratization and the role of governance tools in enforcing ethical guidelines. There needs to be mechanisms within data governance tools to prevent misuse of data and to uphold the principles of fairness and equity in data usage. So with that introduction, I'm going to go back to the question that I was answering there, in which what do data governance tools need to do when implementing data democratization strategies? I gave sort of an intro to that one. Christine, what are your thoughts?
I think I'll just go with one. I'll summarize it in one way. I think for me, what is key is to have a proper data governance maturity in place. What do I mean by that? I think if we have to go back and review and look at that we have the policies and the processes in place, you've defined your roles for individuals and what we do, and you have the matrix for that, then you're obviously going to have the efficiency use of the data that you have. I think it's important to consider that you look at the security and look at the threats that you have. Make sure you have enough safeguards in place to protect your data from any threats. Consider your privacy, which is also very key. That is any of the data that you collect and you share, and then the data that you're using and the data that you're storing. We also have to consider the data sets. What is the quality of the data that you have? I think if you have the data governance maturity in place and you've achieved all those, then it's very possible for you to go back and think about allowing people to have full access to the data and be able to do it. But I'm not saying that it is wrong for each individual department to sort of figure out the data that I have and the tools that I'm going to use. How am I going to benefit from using the data that I've collected and improve efficiency and make sure that it's effective, not only for myself and the stakeholders, but also to think of the customers. That way, it's also going to help you to be able to approach the senior management to probably look for any funding that you're going to need in terms of development tools for being able to allow people to do that and send out requests and be able to do whatever they have to do without having to go to IT and make a request.
Lisa?
When I think about what we're doing now and what we might do in the future, they're two very different answers. So on a local level, in terms of what we're doing with data governance tools, it's very much focused around regulatory compliance and ensuring that personal data protection and mapping of processing activities is properly captured and recorded. But if I think about organisationally where we're going with data, I think, Mike, we might have read your papers. So we're rolling out a new data product architecture. And with that, our intention is to create reusable data sets that we can reuse easily across the organisation and also comply with some of our core data principles or data governance principles. And they pretty much read as you'd recounted as well, Michael. So the first thing that we need to make sure we do is comply with our regulatory obligations, whether that's GDPR or equivalent regulations. In addition to that, we want to make sure that we adhere to our own data management process control standards. So those are the standards that we might set over and above the base regulations. We also are very mindful of ensuring that our data will be used ethically. So we've got sort of standard principles around ethical use of data, thinking about what both employees and our customers might anticipate their data is used for, and making sure that any future uses or use cases that we come up with align with those principles. In addition to that, scalability is another key point. When we're looking at data delivery and platforms, we need to take account of those customer journeys and also think about what existing local data lakes we've got, making sure that they can be merged or at least linked, and that we've got scalability across the franchise. And as both Christine and Michael have mentioned, it's critical that we improve data quality and that we do so in a way that's measurable.
Can I just add, if you're coming to look at it from a privacy point of view, then you have to go back and consider your data protection laws and regulations, or GDPR, where we have Article 6.4, when we have to consider repurposing and reusing data. But this is just focusing on the personal data when we define privacy. It doesn't actually allow you to reuse data. You have to go back and try to use that article, which is to do with, it allows you submission of data for a secondary use. So if you're going to do that, please make sure you check with your data protection officers to make sure that it justifies and it's compatible with the first purpose that as to why you obtained that data and why you're going to use it before you reuse it or reshare it for other purposes, such as if you're sort of doing machine learning or AI. It is very, very important.
Then our final questions before we go to the general Q&A. As organizations look to the future, what major changes should teams expect in data compliance over the next 3 years? Lisa, I'll let you lead again at that one.
So I think there's changes on a number of fronts, and if I start with, say, regulatory, I think there's evolving data protection and compliance regulations that will impact on the way that we use and handle data. Geopolitically, I think there's a number of strands that might influence the future as well. Cross-border activities and regulatory harmonization are two, if you like, challenges, but at the same time, opportunities. What we're seeing is, and we've talked about in other forums this morning, different different countries or jurisdictions taking different views about how data ought to be used, how it's able to be processed and transferred across borders or not, whether that's through surveillance or other processes. Data authentication is another area where there is evolving security concerns, and I anticipate that we'll see methods to verify employees who access that data and to undertake the analytics will change as well. Data encryption is another area which continues to evolve. I think as as fast as banks come up with novel ways of encrypting data. We have cyber risks rising, but that's both internal and external risks that we need to be aware of and manage. In terms of the industry, I think there will be an evolution of industry-specific data security challenges and changes, as well as I'd mentioned earlier, the drive towards real-time compliance and how data will be used in that context.
I think for me personally, it's about evolving with technology. I don't think if I looked back when I started compliance and everything was sort of like a checkbox, we've sort of learned how to be flexible and evolve with technology. So it is a continuous journey that I say learning and training should be part of your personal or professional development. And also just to think of the other thing is probably empowering your team and encouraging the company to invest in their employers such that you're able to evolve and, evolve with the technology that is also happening. Yeah.
Now we're going to turn to our audience questions in the Umbrella app. The first question I have is, why is the data management process generally done by the organization in-house instead of being outsourced? Our audience member submitting this believes that it would optimize the whole process if it was outsourced.
I think it comes down to two things. One is cost. You've got to seek the senior management to, look for the cost that is going to outsource and pay the person that's doing it. The other side, when I look at it, why it's done internally, is that nobody understands your processes and your systems and policies better than your own employers. You employ them, use them, and, give them a challenge. And, we can all learn from that. Involve people into having projects, and this way you cost save. But at the same time, you're giving people a chance to learn and, improve their skills and experience.
I would absolutely echo what Christine said in terms of employees at least understanding the processes, but more importantly, through those processes, understanding the data that they hold. And so whilst they may not be sort of technically as or data literate as perhaps a third-party vendor, they do understand the processes, they do understand the data that they're holding. And so I think, as you've suggested, upskilling the population who own that data is a critical way towards success.
Our next audience question, how can RegTech solutions effectively balance the intricate interplay between data privacy, or I'm here in the UK, privacy, governance, and regulatory requirements in today's evolving compliance landscape?
Well, there's lots of RegTech solutions. So I think the question is, what type of RegTech solution? What is its intent? If it's something that's bringing data together, is it doing so in a way that is protecting the data in terms of how it's intended to be used? Is it ensuring that the integrity of that data is maintained? It really depends on how the RegTech is being brought to the table.
My addition to that is, what is your source of the data that you've used to develop that product? It has to come from somewhere. So if you can demonstrate and you sort of cover that, then I think it's going to assist you to define what type of product you're developing. And then in the basis of that product and what it's supposed to serve, it will allow us to know where the boundaries are and, to see the friction between, say, for example, privacy, to define it, because we're looking at only personal data. But if we're coming to look at data that is supposed to drive business growth, then I'm looking at something else. So it's very key to understand the source of the data and the type of data and the product that you're developing, so that we can then remove that frictionless that we have between the three. Yeah.
Then building on that, what emerging technologies or strategies do you foresee as pivotal in addressing the complex challenges surrounding data compliance, particularly navigating the regulatory concerns of various jurisdictions? What emerging technologies or strategies are pivotal in these complex challenges around data compliance, across regulatory concerns and jurisdictions?
Basic part of that is, I think, going back to start with the regulations that apply and apply for each jurisdiction at hand. Then look at the data that you have. Once you apply and know where the boundaries are, look at the common factors and how you're going to start dealing with that. I don't think it's any different in any way if you're sitting in one jurisdiction or not. The laws and regulations that are there should give you the guidance as the starting foundation to start with the type of data that you have within the company and the type of product or processes that you need to implement with that and work with.
And I think as a global bank, one of the challenges that we've got is working with that sort of various regulatory frameworks. And I think any technology that we're using to help manage data needs to be able to have rules built into it that anticipate that data in a certain jurisdiction can only be used in a certain way, whereas data in another jurisdiction will have less restrictions around it. So I think the key to any emerging technologies that help us to manage data is to ensure that there is the ability to build in different rules for different locations and different types of data as well.
And our last question we have is, what are the critical tenets in creating a successful GRC framework? Now, I'm assuming that we're talking data GRC and not enterprise GRC. But as I mentioned, data GRC leverages that definition that, that GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives of data and address the uncertainty and risk in data and act with integrity in use of that data. Now, from my perspective, of course, it's going to start with building that data governance team from the different roles and subject matter experts that need to be part of that, and developing that overall strategy on how are we approaching that to address the objectives, the risk and uncertainty, and the integrity and compliance aspects of that. And from there, building out the related policies, and then technology that can support that. But what are your perspectives?
I would agree with that. I think the key is to make sure you've got the right stakeholders in the room at the beginning. And so coming from compliance, I would say compliance definitely needs to be there at the beginning. But it is a case of making sure that not only those who might be wanting to use data and build out a data model are there, but also making sure that the key data security experts are there, that the compliance and legal people are there at the table as well. So making sure you've got the right stakeholders involved from the outset is critical.